name is Lydia Novinsky. I'm the head brewer here at Alpha Michigan Brewing Company. We are located in Alpha, Michigan, the smallest village in America with a brewery. I started here as the brewer assistant 4 years ago and took over as head brewer 2 years ago. In this video, we will be discussing the history of beer, where it started, how it grew, and where it ended up today, as well as going over the process that we make beer here in this facility. We have a 3-barrel system which produces 93 gallons of finished product at the end of each batch. The origins of beer extend to the roots of civilization itself. The first records of beer, written or archaeological, appear at Godin Tepe in modern-day western Iraq, cultivated between 3500 and 3100 BCE. Once beer was discovered by barley, it quickly became extremely popular in Sumerian culture and myth. With the discovery of beer, either accidental or intentional, it would be Sumerian women and priestesses that would cultivate the craft. By 2500 BCE, beer would become commercialized after already spreading westward through trade, conquest, and migration to places such as Greece and Egypt. Beer could easily be produced due to both Mesopotamia and Egypt having enormous grain production due to the Fertile Crescent, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and the Nile River Valley, the lifeline of Egypt. Both civilizations included beer in their religious practices, with goddesses dedicated to beer itself. The Sumerian goddess of beer was Ninkasi, the Egyptian goddesses of beer, first Hathor and later Tenenet. Rome would be the driving force to spreading beer cultivation and production. Rome and one of their major influencers, Greece, did not enjoy beer. They preferred wine as it was considered to be manlier. It was considered to be manlier because wine could be served at room temperature or warm and was not affected directly by wild yeast, or not thought to be anyhow. Whereas beer was considered feminine for the exact opposite reason. It needed to be stored and served cool and was directly impacted by wild yeast. Many places that Rome extended their influence over, like France and Spain, also adapted the love and preference for wine. It would be in Germany that the knowledge of beer would be truly utilized. Beer had been produced in Germany as early as 800 BCE, but Roman knowledge for a more refined production process would increase supply and consumption. The German purity laws, Reinheitsgebot, would be created in 1516 by the Duke of Bavaria. The German purity law states that beer is to be made using only 3 ingredients: water, barley, and hops. Yeast would be introduced later. Germans would spread their knowledge of beer with the migration of the Anglos and Saxons into England. Hops were introduced to English as an additive and a preservative. It would be the German immigrants that would spread its popularity in America in the 1840s. The German preference for pilsners and lagers still influence the American palate today. Think Budweiser, Miller, Coors. Kolsch is a German style of beer that originated in Cologne, Germany in the mid-1700s. It would not receive its name until 1918, however, named after Cologne's Old German name, Köln. Kolsch was created as a direct response by Cologne to the popularity of German pilsners and lagers. The mash is the first step in the beer making process. You add predetermined grain to a warm water. Temperature is determined by your recipe. Too hot and you will pull tannins out of the grain, and too cold and you don't get your sugars. Your grain is built up your recipe depending on how many dissolved sugars you want in your wort at the end of the day. The dissolved sugars are what the yeast will eat to create the alcohol. The Alulu beer tablet is the oldest known for beer. It was developed in the Sumerian city-state of Ur almost 4,000 years ago. It consists of raw barley pounded into grain, then formed into cakes called bipar. Those cakes are then slightly baked, and then they're pounded again. You then add that mixture to water and ferment it in pots. You strain out the pulp, and you're left with beer, which is stored in large jars and consumed shortly after. The recipe also detailed variations for light, dark, and strong beers, and the Babylonians developed over 70 different variations. Today, we are brewing our Kolsch recipe. Traditionally, a Kolsch is going to be light in color, from straw to a light gold, or around 4 to 6 SRM. The SRM is an abbreviation for Standard Reference Method, which is the standard for measuring a beer's color. It is used throughout the beer market, and it keeps everybody in the same ballpark. Your grain bill will affect your color, as well as anything you put in your beer. Our recipe is a complete barley base, which means we have no additives or adjunctions in this recipe. Additives will directly impact the flavor of your beer, while adjunctions will add fermentable sugars into the beer without dramatically impacting the flavor profile. Once the mash step has been completed, we now need to remove the grain from the mash. This process is known as sparging. Sparge has its roots in Latin, meaning to sprinkle or scatter. During the sparge process, we add hot water over our grain to release all of the sugars that have been extracted during the mash process. We add rice hulls to our grain bill, which increase the productivity of the sparge, allowing all of the sugars to fall completely off of our grain. It doesn't affect the flavor. All it does is increase the productivity of this process. The early addition of hops are add bitterness, the middle hops add flavor, the late hops add aroma. The standard of adding hops as an additive and preservative was first developed by the Benedictine monks outside of Munich, Germany in 700 CE. Prior to the use of hops, wormwood, mugwort, heather, and other various ingredients were used. The hop bitterness is measured in IBUs, or the International Bitters Units. The higher the number, the more pronounced the hop flavor will be in the beer. The flavor profile of our Kolsch is going to have a subtle fruitiness, a light barley flavor mixed with a mild bitterness. So once our boil is completed, our settle is done, it's time to transfer our wort into the fermenter to begin the fermentation process. In order to do that, we need to take the temperature from about 210 degrees down to 70, which is the fermentable temperature. To do that, we use this handy thing called the wort chiller. What it does is cold water comes in when the hot wort goes in and finishes us off in the fermenter at a nice fermentable temperature. We shoot for 70. Anywhere around 68 to 72 is a wonderful temperature for ale yeast. You will notice we have a blow-off tube into a bucket of suds. This is our racking arm, and what it does is it allows the off gases during the fermentation process of the yeast eating the sugars, and allows the gases to go out without exploding our fermenter or allowing other things back into the beer. The fermentation process is a very natural occurring thing. The yeast mixed with oxygen and sugars gives you a byproduct of alcohol, which is why taking your starting gravity is so important, so that you know when you take your final gravity how many of those sugars were eaten and what percentage of alcohol you are left in your beer. The fermentation process is the process of creating the alcohol in the beer. Yeast eats the sugars, but it relies on oxygen to feed, just like any other living thing. In the past, wild yeast was cultivated by using the same fermentation vessels over and over again, creating some kind of a consistent fermentation process. In 1857, Louis Pasteur discovered the importance of living yeast and the importance of it for beer. He offered his knowledge to the French brewing industry, suggesting that impurities in yeast could be removed through a number of purification methods, although none of which were wholly successful. Emil Hansen, a chemist at Carlsberg, was able to isolate and clone the yeast, ideally to produce Carlsberg Lager in 1883. A portion of our proceeds go directly back into the community in a positive manner.